So this is Introduction to the Ennobling Eightfold Path, Part 3. Linda's been talking about it earlier this week. The traditional Buddhist teachings often appear in the form of lists: the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Five Aggregates, the Seven Factors of Awakening, etc., etc. And, these lists can serve as anchors in the teachings, um, and can provide a kind of structure that helps us remember. That's why the lists were first done for memory, first created as a memory, a help with memory, and they can help orient ourselves to the teachings. So that's one of the reasons that what we're really doing in this series, the longer series, not just on the Eightfold Path, but we're going to do a longer series, is referencing these traditional teachings and lists in a series of talks, because they offer a shared language that guides us. But there is another reason we are referencing them. We want to make it explicit that what we are teaching is grounded in the fundamentals of early Buddhism, even though we're presenting it in a somewhat different way. And sometimes we're not explicitly stating the teachings, but we're going to be doing that a bit more. Now, some people who have learned and practiced in more traditional Buddhist settings experience what we're doing and wonder, is this really Buddhism at all? They may hear the emphasis on reflection, talking about experience, and hear psychological understanding, and conclude that what we're teaching is much more psychology than Dharma. And of course, it's true. There are many elements of psychological understanding in how we teach, not accidentally, because much of our dukkha, much of our upsets, our dissatisfaction, even our anguish, arises in the ways we mentally and emotionally relate to our experiences. And this was something the Buddha was deeply concerned about. In many ways, his teaching was a careful exploration of how the mind works, how confusion forms, how suffering takes shape, and how freedom becomes possible. Again, some of this is kind of stuff that it's a review, but we're trying to put that review together into a form. So, as you probably know, the path of freedom the Buddha described was not primarily about changing the external world. It was about freedom from mental and emotional pain and suffering, from patterns of confusion, reactivity, misunderstanding that creates so much distress in our lives. So, for this reason, we strongly believe that what we are teaching is Dharma, and it's our hope that this series of talks can make that more explicit, showing how these teachings connect directly with the foundations of early Buddhist practice. So, as I said, over the course of this week, we've been introducing the Eightfold Path. And in traditional Buddhist language, it's presented as the fourth noble truth. In the language we tend to use in reflective meditation, we call it the fourth ennobling. It is a path that winds its way out of confusion and delusion and gradually leads towards greater clarity, ethical sensitivity, and freedom. So we don't think about the Eightfold Path as kind of a rigid kind of program, but rather as a set of qualities and directions of practice. And through meditation, reflection, and life, living our experience, we slowly begin to recognize which ways of thinking and acting lead towards greater clarity, kindness, curiosity, and stability, and which ways lead us towards more confusion, more tension, or suffering. And over time, this discernment grows. At first, though the discernment might feel uncertain, we may only recognize it after the fact, or at least after the fact some of the time, maybe after we have spoken harshly or acted impulsively or gotten caught in a familiar pattern of distress. But little by little, something begins to change if we stick with this. We start to see patterns more quickly. Eventually, we may even notice them while they are unfolding. This kind of discernment gradually begins to appear at different moments throughout our days. Not always, of course, because nothing is always. But for many people, for many of us who practice reflective meditation, if we stay with it over time, this discernment becomes more trustworthy. We often say that the path of reflective meditation is often slower, but it is often slower in a way that allows understanding to become deeper and more sustaining. Reflective meditation invites us to explore the 8 dimensions of the Eightfold Path, not as abstract doctrines, but as living questions within our lives. And here are a few of those questions. How do I understand what is happening to me? What intentions guide my actions? How do my words affect other people? What kind of work support a life of care and integrity? What patterns of mind lead towards suffering and which lead towards greater peace? Now, each of those questions that I just posed could be seen as one of the spokes on the Eightfold Path, but I didn't divide them up that way. These are not questions we answer like once and for all. Well, I know the answer to this question. Um, we have to return to them again and again in different situations because the answers are going to shift and change as circumstances shift and change. And as we keep returning to these questions, something else begins to shift. The Eightfold Path slowly becomes less of a teaching to memorize and more of a framework for ongoing discovery. Really a way of orienting ourselves as we learn through living our lives and reflecting upon them. What leads towards greater freedom and what does not? So I will end the talk there and we'll sit with whatever comes up. All.